Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 69, and I've got a special guest for you today. But before we get to that, go ahead and like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you need to do to stay in touch with the podcast. And let's get to our special guest. Our guest today is a self-help hacker, strategist, coach, and founder of the Weekly Wins and Losses podcast. He is a passionate speaker about such topics as connection, purpose, fulfillment, and many more. His passion is to create transformational experiences for himself and others as a way to explore what it means to truly live and be fully alive. I've had the honor of joining him on his podcast, and I think he can attest to this. And our conversation prior to this has been very deep, very enjoyable, and I'm very, very excited to learn more about his story. And without further ado, my guest today is James Heppner. James, how you doing?
Hey, Dylan, it was wonderful. We had a little pre-talk on the record here. We had a nice little laugh. My friend, it's been too long. I loved it. I had you on my show a couple of months ago, and you are a master of your craft, so I have deep honor, and so I'm honored to be here with you.
I appreciate it, James. And we almost couldn't press record soon enough, because the instant we started the video, we just started talking about all sorts of things that were deep and intrinsically important to reveal to people. And yet we missed all that. But here we are. We're talking about important stuff. I'm glad to have you on. James, why don't you just start with a little introduction about yourself? How did you become you? How did you get here to this place, and kind of take it as far and as long as you want to? Tell us a story, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, and maybe perhaps just to tie that together, right? Like, so when you and I jump into this little talk prior to the record, for you and I, it seems like to shield ourselves is just so difficult. You just get right to it.
Yeah, it is now, right?
That's the point. It is now.
Yep.
But we had to go from a certain place, and we had to travel through a certain land and a certain season of life to now be like, actually, who I am. Why bother shielding? I want to experience and expose and explore. And it's like when you get to do that with another human being, my friend, it's just been, and again, it's an honor to have someone like yourself who I can clearly see who's done the work.
Yeah.
I know you're interviewing me here, but let me just say it this way. I got, tremendous appreciation for your work. I released your episode with me on, I think it was last week or the week before, and I re-listened to the whole thing again. And it's like, here's a man who is consistent, who's congruent, who's integritous, the best that he knows how, bringing together, stress testing, feeling the tension in real time. And I think, brother, you're a man after my own heart. Like I feel that about myself. And I really enjoy that about you, and it lights me up more about how I enjoy my life. So, when I think about, perhaps I can say it like this: I've lived many journeys in life, and just for simplicity's sake, I'll say for the audience here that I'm going to focus on part one of the story and part two of the story. And part one of the story is me building and me creating. And often in life, we build and create something that we have imagined, perhaps society has taught us, we become trained to. Nonetheless, we've become either seduced, and also we've made choice to take a certain angle towards life. And for me, it was, how could I accomplish more and achieve more and accumulate more? And that's often the first stage of life, is that we look at how we can get more, how we can solve for answer. We get our strength from not the unknown, but from the known. Watch this. I'll type it into Google. Here's the answer. Certainty, certainty, certainty.
Yep.
Right. And so we get most of our strength and power from that. And what's interesting is, to the point on shielding, and it just dawned on me, I don't think we ever, in that season of life, I don't think any of us ever desires to shield from ourselves the presence that we are, or from others who we really are. The only thing is, we're so, inoculated and so drawn to just the more. And let's be honest. I mean, you shared prior to the show, which, congratulations, I'll say here, you gave birth to a girl. How you did that, I have no idea. Your wife did. There you go.
Common misconception: men can't have babies.
So wonderful. It's so nice. Exactly. It's like, this is just fact. This is reality, my friends. Yep. This is how it is. but I thought it was really precious. I thought it was, to be honest, I thought it was kind of cute when you said we had a baby. I said, no, your wife had a baby.
Sure
You were
did.
carrying ice water. No, my friend, you were a beneficial presence there, no doubt, right? It was wonderful. It was really good. But I think back to the point, I think without us knowing, we often get so busy and preoccupied with something, and that is securing, the relationship, whether it's we're dating and that dating turns to marriage, but we're wanting to like secure the woman or the woman securing the man, right? Not securing as in I own you, but it's like, well, I've got this kind of locked down, like this part of my life, I've got that chunk taken care of. Then I
Yep.
buy my first house, I got that. Perhaps you have a career before any of this happens. I don't know. I have no idea. But these are these big chunks that we look at and we say, how do I sufficiently bring things in? And I think it's a beautiful play of life, how there's a moment where we say too much information, and we just laser down on what needs to happen, and we look towards where's the answer, what's the thing to do, what's the thing not to do, and we just gun for it because we want to achieve. And if you think about what we achieve, the massive blocks, the support mechanisms of life, typically a lot of them happen, at the undertow anyway, in the first half of life. So in the first half, we're like, yeah, married or partner, child, house, car. It's a proverbial, and it isn't just the North American way. It's, let's be honest, like back in, ancestral time, the human being back in the day would die off once it was finished having babies, basically. So now its role is done and it's, and it's over. So evolutionary perspective, that's what it was. And so I went through that season. I was raised in a home where my father demanded of us to be good, God-fearing people.
Mm-hmm.
Do good in the world, bring purpose, help, be beneficial, and serve. My dad was a pastor of a megachurch at the time. And what's interesting, though, he also had a farm on the side. He was a small farmer, and he had a demand for us to be a certain way. But his desire, for me, it was evident, though he didn't have a large farm and have all the new equipment and the big stuff. When we'd go for a drive on Sunday, and he would judge people for working on Sunday. He would say, well, it's too bad they do this or that. And that was his perspective. But his desire was, you could see he was looking at that brand new John Deere combine driving on the field. And you could see he was kind of like going, wow, that looks really nice. Or he'd drive by these really well manicured farmyards that obviously took a lot of capital to do. And he would be like, there you go. And what's interesting is I onboarded that, which we humans do from our, when we were at home with our parents always have a demand and a desire. A human being is like that. It's full of demand and desire, but we tend to follow the desire over the demand all day long. So I chose to onboard. I think what I need to do is I need to become financially successful. And that was a massive chunk. So when I think about buying a house, the woman, the car, I said, this all embodies one glorious thing, and I must achieve this. Unbeknownst to me, I think I was doing it more so for him than for myself, because as soon as I arrived there, it felt bloody empty. I'll just be honest. It felt empty. I'm like, hey, what? I got the boat, I got the car, I got whatever, I got the house, I got stuff. And I remember sitting on my porch one day and looking down the street, and it looked to me in the neighborhood we live, I kind of bought into an eco chamber. Like we all had this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And what was interesting is, though I wasn't too enamored by it, it kind of did still bring me to the awareness that I didn't have to worry about attending to, could I feed my family? Because I thought, well, that's taken care of. So that's the draw. We feel like, well, there is some benefit, which is true. You attend to your needs and you get your bills taken care of. You feel like you've provided well, perhaps, right? 2008 rolls around and the shit show of my life erupts. And think about if you watch a football game, the first half, players go into, through the tunnel, they go into the locker room, they have a little chat, and they come out. And how they come out in the second half is very important, because I don't care if you're ahead or you're behind, you need to show up in a specific way. You need to adapt, you need to energize and move in a certain direction. Well, let's say it like this, 2008 comes along and I was ahead in the game. The only thing is, all of a sudden, while I was in the locker room, I got notice that you've been selected by the government audit, and I'd sold a few houses to myself personally, at arm's length transactions, and apparently I'd undervalued them. So apparently I owed X amount of money, which fair enough, I needed to pay. a couple 100,000. I had the money, but I didn't want to pay it. So you can see the level of resistance that shows up, shielding myself from reality. It's the first play typically is when you go like, well, what have I always done? I've shielded myself from this. This is distracting me from getting more. I will just put this off and say, this is excluded from my life. I don't need to see this. I don't need to see. So I tried pushing it off and fighting the government, which of course doesn't work very well. Typically it doesn't work. They got bigger lawyers and bigger stuff.
Yeah.
It's just not helpful.
They'll get their money.
No, exactly. Right. And so income wise, the value that I was able to draw into my bank account, the bank accounts were fat up until then. I paid down the audit. There you go. The only thing is, how was I going to generate incoming? I was in the real estate sector, land development, custom home builder, basically. I remember one day just contemplating while I was making my coffee or morning drink. And I remember thinking to myself, who am I? Who am I anyway? Who is this James on the inside? Meaning, can James do this all over again? I'd heard a talk, and the talk was like, listen, if they take it all from me or something happened and it's all gone, I'll just become the same person, perhaps faster, because it's of me, is what this individual said. And I thought, who is this person here? I thought, dang it, is this person maybe a fallacy? But then I reckoned what really maybe was a deep fallacy, and that is I had bought into this narrative, the desire of my dad to amount to something financially. I bought this and saying this is going to bring me joy, and it made me feel empty. The only thing is we take that pressure and we add another pressure, which is my son is born with high functioning autism. We add a few more of those pieces, and all of a sudden the human being goes, and this is what typically halftime will bring. It's like halftime of life. It's like, hey, you've built your whole ecosystem on a certain way of thinking. Mm-hmm. But that way of thinking is now going to be shaken, and now something else will come. Where instead of you saying, I will build my future on the security of life and just the bigness of life, now we're invited to say, I will build my future on not just the known, but the unknown. The fact that I'm small and big at the same time. The fact that I get to be insecure and secure at the exact same time. Because if you're not insecure, then you apparently think you're God and there's nothing you can learn, And so I'll never forget, there I was, contemplating what to do about all this mess, and what do we do when we resist something that's wanting to enter, when we feel so pressurized? What do we do when we think that this isn't the good news? We label it as bad, and typically, and at least for me, in my opinion, what I did is I try to think myself out of this mess. And here's how I did it. I decided I was going to basically squirrel up in my bedroom. For 18 and a half hours a day, I slept with melatonin and gravel. I would just sedate myself. I didn't want to be here. I wanted to numb out. But then I was constantly thinking while I was dreaming. I remember waking up in a sweat. I was trying to get myself out of this and going, where did I go wrong? Where am I the problem? Blah, blah, blah. And then trying to eliminate all these things. Never did it dawn on me that I could utilize things. No, I was trying to eliminate, less, because I'm going in a certain direction. I'm headed there. I'm headed up. Think about Icarus, just going up, up, up. Listen, until Icarus came down, went into the sea, that's when Icarus became the being that he was, right? So halftime show, how did I come out of the tunnel? Man, I look sheepish and ragged, my friend. Halftime shows, man, it's like time to engage life. It's like 2018, or how did I come out, my friend? I checked out. I made a decision to check out. Because here's the thing, life happens to all of us, for all of us, but I said, this is the bad news. This is what I don't want. How often isn't that what we think of a loss? Not what I want, it's the bad news. The win, it's what we want, it's the good news. Let's shield ourselves from all of the gifts of what actually life is. The probability, it's more like the inevitability of life. Typically the survival mechanism, and I know you'll know about this way better than I do, because you're in the military. It's like we operate, if we can't first do proper care to the fact that we're survival beings, pardon the language, but we're effed. Like we're fucked.
Yeah. You don't have to pardon your language here. You can fucking say
it. Okay. Yeah. So you have to see that whenever you are about actioning anything, the not just possibility, not just the probability, but the inevitability of what you're going to experience as a feeling of a win and or a loss, that's inevitable. You're going to experience either I feel like I'm winning or I feel like I'm losing. The human being in a very primary state looks at it from the lens of, am I gaining or am I losing? Is it good? Is it bad? But that's the problem of dualism.
Yeah.
dualism. But remember, the first half of life, this is what we do to get ahead. So there is a place, there is a space. My kids, they're still like, it's funny because I'm the guy that imports eggs, a certain kind of egg. So I live in Canada. It's just a chicken egg, but I import an egg from a chicken that hasn't eaten soy and has eaten only salamanders and has been eating like grazing on grass. So in Vancouver here, we have chickens that do this. The only thing is there's a season when they have to feed them grain. I don't want grain-fed chicken eggs. So I'm the guy that imports them from California, ship them up in a cool container, and I get them to the border. And my kids think it's hilarious and silly and probably stupid. So the one day we're going for a walk, and my son says to me, "Dad, why do you do that anyway?" And I don't always do it because sometimes I can get those eggs here, and sometimes I can't. If it's off season, I can't. And I give him, and I think to myself, okay, how can I really care and be tender towards him? So I give him like the short little Cole's Notes, like synopsis version of it. I get it for this reason, and Dad is concerned for this and this, and I've seen health effects if I do different. That's why. So I measure. So I have to bring logic to him, because for him, if it's not logic, the first half of life, it's all logic, right? He grabs his phone, and what does the human do at the first half of life? He opens the bloody Google, types in the difference from California eggs to British Columbia, Vancouver eggs. And apparently there's no difference. And then he reads some quackery, apparently that Dad's a quack, and he reads this to me and he goes, "I got the answer for you." And I think to myself, yeah, but this is the beautiful part of life. If we as adults don't transition from the first half to the second half, if we want to stay stuck in the first half, we don't leave room for our children to be like we wanting to find answers, because answers is how they build their life. Questions, not too many. Let's just get answers, because we're on a mission. We got to like get somewhere. We got to create something. And it's kind of a beautiful thing. But back to the play. So there I am, the halftime show. I come out of the tunnel. I look all disheveled, and I, drugged to the max with melatonin, not like unhelpful. Well, definitely a handful of melatonin is not helpful at the time. And then gravel. And so to be totally honest, all that I can say is what allowed me to go from the first part of the story, so part one of the story, to part two, is when I finally woke up to the reality that what I was attempting and trying to do wasn't working, which is trying to think my way out of it by eliminating, just wasn't helping. And I remember one day, and it was like 2.25 years after I began this journey of trying to eliminate, I woke up thinking, maybe this formula is flawed. Maybe I should try something different. But of course, you built like 2.5 years on it. You're like, this can't. But I was starting to go loopy in my brain. Like, I'm not enjoying this anymore, right?
Mhm.
And I remember just thinking, what happens if I would start utilizing this and start being like, well, actually, my journey, and the fact that I wanted to appease my dad, or I went after his desire. So what happens if there's actually some goodness in this? I'm not trying to change a negative to positive, because a negative is never something bad. A loss is never like negative. It's just a loss. It's just something. And I remember started to onboard this, but what made the biggest difference, I'll never forget. I don't know if I shared the story with you, and if I have, just cut me off. But the one day, Meg and I went to an event, and I remember I was just in the midst of my story, by the way, part one of the story. And we go to a Tony Robbins event, and it's a Date with Destiny event. And on day 4, it's relationship day. And Meg wakes up in the morning. I wake up. We'd had over 4 days, about 8 hours of sleep. Now, keep in mind, listeners, I'm not used to sleeping anything less than 18.5 hours. Like, I'm the guy that honestly, when I said I was going to work to the office, I would, and that was rarely if I ever did that when I was going through part one of the story. But if I said I'm going to the office, I'd jump in the car, I'd find some old abandoned farmyard or a dirt road, and I'd pull over the car and I'd hop in the back seat with a blanket and pillow. So I was like a homeless person, kind of, in the backseat of my car, sedating myself, so I wanted to bring value. But getting back to this whole scenario, so there I am at the Date with Destiny. My wife says, "Hey, listen, this is going to be an incredible day." I said, "How so?" And she goes, "It's a relationship day, baby. We get to go down and get to learn about relationships and about, between you and I and different things and grow." And I said, "Oh, Meg, you know what? I'm just so tired. Like, I haven't slept a lot. I sleep more than what I normally, in the past, I would sleep maybe 7 hours a night, but this story, I was sleeping 18.5. And she says, baby, you can do what you want, but it mean the world to me if you come down. And what's so interesting is she completely released me to make my own decision. She goes down, and I stay in the room. And I think to myself, fantastic. I close those hotel curtains, and pull up at that office chair that's always in the room, and I push it up against the window and I make it tight. I'm like, nice and black. This is fantastic. I take a handful of melatonin. I gobble this stuff up. I take some gravel. I'm like, it's going to hit me in about 5 minutes. I go under the sheets and I'm comfortable for about 15 seconds. And I think to myself, she's basically raised our kids for the last 2.5 years. She says, I mean the world to me if you could do this one thing for me, and you can't do this. She never told me that you have to. Frankly, she's moving on with her life, and here I am. I'm choosing this. So I walk down the stairs. I don't know why I didn't take the elevator, but perhaps I was trying to get myself away because I'm half falling asleep by now. I'm white as a sheet. Seriously, it's not pretty.
Yeah.
It's not pretty, you know? And I enter the room and open the door and I see Tony Robbins way in the front of the room. He's talking about depression. He's kind of like doing an intervention with someone. And I'm hearing this stuff and I'm saying, well, the doctor diagnosed me with that. And so I'm kind of going, well, I hope he's, you know how it is. You get overtly sensitized to like what you think you have. And so here I'm thinking, well, I hope he's gentle with this person. And he's saying, listen, depression can be a real thing. But he goes, typically what I observe in you, he says, this lady, is you're doing your depression. You're bringing it. You're acting it. This is what you're doing. We do it long before we ever really have it typically. And so I'm looking for Team Purple, and you know, Team Purple's wearing like purple headbands, and I'm looking for my team, and I'm walking along the side, and then he comes walking my direction, not directly towards me, but I feel like he's walking and talking directly to me. You know how it is when you go to an event or anything, it's like, how does he know? This is me. How does he know this shit? And he's talking about how selfish depression is and how it takes no courage to totally just be completely asking of everyone to serve you. And he's just going on and on. And I'm like, damn, pressure. I'm like, holy smokes, this guy, I thought I liked it, but I'm reevaluating this whole play because it's really intense. You know what I mean? So fine, Team Purple, I sit my ass down and I just sat down. I was just comfortable sitting down. Also, the whole thing just erupts because when you go to these events, some people say just a rock concert. Well, the thing is, it is a concert to some degree that you're going to feel a bunch of stuff. You're going to feel happy. Yeah. You're going to feel sad. You're going to feel joy. You're going to feel pain. You're going to have that wide array of feels pretty quick. And I already realized that from the other days we've been there, that this is what was happening. But this was different because I was just happy that I was here and thinking like, hopefully nobody noticed me. Oh, of course, I thought it was so special. Like the world news is watching me. Like, what the fuck was I thinking? Like, this is what depression often will bring. If you know what I mean? Like, they're not publicizing an article about, oh, James walked into the room. Like, this is not what's happening on national television. Like, come on, you know? So I'm sitting there going, well, I'm just here. So now they finally won't just like be everyone looking at me. Everyone stands up and also realizing, yeah, they're just doing group work like we've done before, but I just sit my ass down. I just keep sitting. And then one of the girls from the group comes over and says, hey, James, would you like to join us? And I said, actually, no, I think I'll just be okay here. And you know what's interesting is I think I felt the unhelpful side of being overtly significant. Somebody was just inviting me to come, not through sympathy, but just like, hey, you want to come join? And I'm like, no, I'm going to be here. So I realized I was doing depression. I'm like, holy shit. And then, of course, the whiteness that I felt, the sheet of the white, whatever was in me, like my wife said, she'd see me come in the room and I don't know if I was even properly dressed. I think my shirt was half buttoned. I don't know because I had just like run down because I was trying to be there. And also I remember there's a song that came on, it's Flowers of the Forest or something like it. It's the moment when the shell of my ego cracked. And they say when your shell of your ego cracks properly once, it never needs to do that again. And what's interesting is I stood up and these people, they just welcomed me. And not like, oh, we were so worried about you. I just melted right in. And what's fascinating is the second half of my life, ever since that moment, I've had an insatiable love with life. That I, my friend, get to the fuck be here and participate with this, whatever this is incredible. So the second half of my journey, instead of shielding myself from the realities of life, I enjoy observing what is, and I think that's what I enjoy so much about you. You know, you observing what is really there and not doing the bunch of fantasy play, trying to think yourself into some place of betterment. It's positive thinking BS. You got to see things for what they are and let reality just serve you the notice that it actually is trying. It's loving you more than it's caring for you. And that's the good news.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to unpack there. And thank you. You know, you said some remarkably kind words to me even before we started this. And then again, right there, you've given me so many compliments, but I'm always amazed by the the similarity of stories, of listening to you have this conversation about, I shouldn't say conversation, this telling this story of yourself, and then comparing it with my own, and recognizing just how remarkably similar that journey is, maybe not in terms of context and situations and stuff, but emotionally, and I always find, and I don't think I'll ever change this thought. But if anything, it's become bolder and more, I've become more aware of it, is that we may have different circumstances, we may have different contexts, but we have the same emotions. We feel the same things. We think the same things oftentimes. And I think one of the things I want to kind of dig into more is that duality of self-awareness that you talked about, I think about midway through your story, of this idea of right versus wrong, good versus bad, where we have to build a contrast in the early part of life, because that's how it makes sense to us. And I did the same thing, up until, my story became part two, if you want to put it in relative terms. And so, like, when part two comes for your life, I think it's remarkable when you can start looking at the world and saying good and bad is a figment of the imagination, right? And wrong is a figment of the imagination. Obviously, there are things that we can put in place that say, this is probably bad, right? This is, we can all kind of agree that this is bad. We could probably say, for the most part, murder's bad. But then there's this interesting thing of like justifiable homicide. I always kind of go back to that example because we've legalized it, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it makes sense because there are evil people in the world that want to do bad, and it's justifiable to defend yourself against those evil people. And so we can't just say homicide's bad because, well, there's justifiable homicide. You have the right to defend yourself. That's okay. And so then you have this thing that, initially you're like, well, it's bad, but it's not in certain circumstances. And so you start to see that reality is quite gray. It can be quite gray. And so it's not just black and white. And I'm not sure if you've ever had the chance to have a conversation with Jonathan McLernon, but yes. I mean, he's got his podcast, right? It's not so black and white. Like he's right? Like that is what I think this part two that you're referring to kind of represents, is this duality that we have in the beginning, where we have to think about it as right and wrong and good and bad and, yes and no. It starts to close in, and we start to kind of mold ourselves to that consistency and clarity that we realize it's never that simple. It's always more complex. And then we give more, patience, we give more empathy to situations, unless you've never gotten out of part one, right? Like this idea that if you never look beyond this duality, if you never step into the middle, right, you really don't understand how to enjoy and live a fulfilling life, because you're always looking for the enemy, right? Like we made a joke earlier, like, go kill your enemy. Like, you're always looking for your enemy if you're in part one. In part two, I'm not out here looking for an enemy talking about what I'm talking about. I'm not looking for the big bad man that says, you can't express yourself. I'm looking for the people that want to learn how to express themselves. I'm looking for friends. I'm not looking for enemies. If enemies come, I'm okay with fighting them, right? But my goal isn't to find enemies. It's to create allies. It's to create friends, and to help people find the same fulfillment and joy and love that I've found. But I'm also trying to help them learn how to defend it, because I know the reality out there is there's people that do not want them to follow that path. And I find, obviously, people like yourself that are remarkably similar. And that always fascinates me, that we can have two remarkably different stories, remarkably different contexts, and still find ourselves in remarkably similar places in terms of
Mhm.
human thought and self-awareness, if that makes sense.
Well, I think, yeah, and just to play into that, I think the uniqueness is when you observe evidence, it reveals typically evidence. How can you argue with evidence? It has happened. Like evidence reveals the truth. Like evidence is. It's not a compliment. It's evidence. This is how you live your life. And so therefore, I don't give compliment. I give evidence. I just all I do is I go, well, I'm making an observation in my opinion, and I might unpack something, but it's based on the evidence that I'm observing in another. And so based on that, when I think about reality is gray, my son, and we never, I mean, my wife and I, we like, I'm sure you and your wife did, you selected some names and you both decided which one is most suited.
Mhm.
I wasn't so excited about the name Gray because his name is Harrison Gray Heppner. What was interesting is Harrison, to a large degree, was my liberation because Harrison, there's so much going on in there that he talks to himself all the time. He's a teenager, but he loves it. He wears a t-shirt every now and again and says, listen, how would I not love, or how could I not do what I do, which is, I'm botching this, but basically it says he's claiming I talk to myself and that's the good news. And he's basically saying we all have stories that we're sharing with ourselves. I'm just making it apparent that I'm enjoying them audibly. Okay. So if you have a problem, then you can just enjoy yourself. You know what I mean? And so what's really interesting is I think, simplistic living, and you think about like reductionism during the industrial age, like how they say that America beat the Germans or whatever, these forces beat the Germans because we were more proficient at reducing down to an art. When you come into work, my friend, you just put a bolt in this hole, and then you do that all day long. The next guy holds a piece of steel in place. You do the same thing all day long. And so we actually attribute, so when it comes to survival, we attribute a large part of why we're here through reductionism. So when you think about this either or, this duality is kind of like, it's what a dog does, honestly. A dog looks for where is it most dangerous and where is it most safe. That's what a dog can only ever do. An animal does this. A dog only does that. The human has another dimension where it can perceive things beyond looking for more danger or more safety. It can actually just be staring out the window. Like people listening, try this. Just look out the window, and often you'll find if you're just looking at, you're not looking for anything, you're just looking out the window. So if we enact our human consciousness, what we've been given, then our most comfortable and highest state is in the place of gray. It's not in the either or. Do I choose this or that? If you ever want to take non-courageous action, enter the world of duality. Do I do this or that? Because that's just survival based.
Mhm.
So though we have to address survival mechanism, we have to at some point in time empathize not just what the problem is, but empathize with the possibility. Unless we empathize with the possibility, we're stuck, and we're stuck making choices that are only solving for self-preservation. In my opinion, self-preservation as a human, I don't know how empathy can properly show up. So when I think about, earlier when you and I were talking, you were saying, I'm very comfortable with helping humanity. Like you're a mental health coach, or you're this coach, and you're really helping. I really honor you for that. And then at the same token, you're also like a sniper. You train people to take out the enemy, and you go, I have no problem ending life that's evil. And to your play, it's like you're saying, hey, listen, killing people, like creating murder might not be helpful, but sometimes it's actually helpful. So this is what I think. Tell me what you think. I'm curious here because I
Sure.
think to some degree we create these dualities. That's like, which one do I be? Oh, I want to be helpful and human. Okay, I'm going to do this now. And then also like, no, but I also want to like do something to help humans in different ways. So you do that. And we're like, oh, which is right, which is wrong. And then as a child or in that first half of life, we're torn, like, oh shit, that's the hell of our life. Why are we so torn? And then that's almost becoming conflicting. So now it's stealing from our energy. When in the second half, what happens is what I hear you talking about. And when I observe you and you and I chit chat,
Yep.
it's like those two things are fueling each other. So it's a both and. It's not choosing which is right or wrong, but both and. Like I'm an amateur on the Bible, but I'll tell you one thing. It does say a time for love and hate, a time for death and life, a time for this and that. And people are like, yeah, but that sounds like it's contradicting. What's fascinating is if you ever want to live a life through willpower, you're going to be exhausted because you're always trying to decide what's good or bad. And
Yeah.
whether the story of Adam and Eve is true or not, honestly, I couldn't really care. It's a beautiful story, and here's why. So anybody who has no faith, perfect. Great story for you. Great story for all of us. Here's why. There was once, apparently, and again, if it's a story, it's a myth, fable, whatever it ends up being, let it be. But it's a great story. Okay. There's this God mechanism, whatever, who made everything and made the human. And the human was told that this is the Garden of Eden. You get to enjoy all this abundance, but just don't go to that tree and eat of that fruit. So the humans enjoyed themselves for a little bit of time, like totally naked. I mean, I love walking around the house naked. So that'd be just the funnest thing ever for me. Like me and my wife naked all day long. This would be amazing, incredible. Like, why the freak do you need an apple, man? You don't need an apple. You got what you want. Anyway, so they spot this tree and they're like, shit, we want to be like God. We want to decide what's right or wrong. So this is the problem of duality, wanting to decide what's right or wrong. And what's interesting is it's not the apple that was like a serpent in it. I don't know what, I don't think anyway. I think what it ends up being is if you read the story, it's basically God said this, oh, you want to do that? Well, now I'm going to have to throw you out of this abundance and you're going to have to go toil over there. You're going to be the hamster wheel spinning, meaning if you want to ever enter into a hellish existence, so hell or heaven isn't just here or isn't just there. It is mostly, all I know is it ends up being something we create here.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to enter into a really hellish existence, choose which is right or wrong. Be a judge on yourself. Say which is better, helping humanity or ending life that is evil. And you're like, oh, see, that's the conflict we feel, I think, in the first half of life, because we have these desires in us. But the thing is, we're busy building and creating structure. But we all know that unless we poke at the structure, like we're in the fourth churning now, right now, and in the world, every 100 years we go through the cycle. And so what we're going through is going to last roughly 25 years. We've got about another 8 years left of this. So read the book for whoever wants to read the book Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. It's how I do my whole. It's how I think about business, investments, people. And here's why: you can't predict the future. But what you can do is you can begin to understand what will happen in the future and in present through the tendencies of a human.
Yeah. And
so this fourth churning we're in is literally where the structure is being poked everywhere when it comes to currency. People talk fiat and then they talk cryptocurrency. When they talk about the government, apparently Trump's an asshole, apparently Biden's an asshole. Everybody's an asshole. Anything that's attached to structure, if you become aware, everyone's an asshole. We're poking structure. Now, what's interesting is we do this in the fourth churning, not so that we can take the structure down, but we do it because we're trying to make it better. See, poking at something makes it better if we do it properly. But if we have a desire, so oftentimes in the second half of life, if we come out of the tunnel and we say, you know what? I was invited to make room for the gray in my life, but I say, fuck that shit. I'm going to become more of a fundamentalist. You know what I mean? I'm going to tell you exactly where the hell you're wrong. It's like, oh my goodness, some people actually end up accumulating more. They say they're more joyful. The only thing is watch their life. Watch how fucking small it gets. It gets to be about this wide. Their lens of what they can onboard, not much.
Yeah.
Both and, right? Yeah. Instead of, either or.
I mean, like when you say both and, it represents an acceptance. It represents acceptance itself, right? It's looking at facets of life that if you say either or, you then disregard. And that's not good, because I think what happens within disregarding something is you then, when it becomes a problem, you build contempt, right? And I think contempt is the downfall of humanity. I really think when you harbor hate, when you harbor contempt, it is a remarkably destructive emotion, because it's a feeling, right? Like contempt and hate are a feeling of, I know that this is the worst, right? It's like, and I think I grew up more conservative than I did liberal, but I'm neither, right? But I've watched conservatives look at liberals and say, and harbor contempt, right? You're trying to take away my Second Amendment right. contempt, right?
Mhm.
But then liberals look at conservatives and say, you're trying to bring religion into the state, contempt, right? And so there's never, I don't know where it began, right? I'm sure there's a book out there that talks about it, but
Mhm.
at some point there became this this polarization of the party system and beyond, right? There's so many different things. You can look at men and women, even, you know, like gays and religion, right? For the most part, religions don't look at gays as being, you know, human beings. They look at them and being the devil, right? And so, like, how, wherever that started to begin in whatever topic we're talking about, that contempt and that hate has
Good point.
disenfranchised the conversation and the discussion. And so you can't build anything off of that. You can't build anything off of either or. You can only really build a foundation of interdependence, which I think humanity is really built upon. The socialization of humans is very much dependent on and both, right? Both and. You need to be able to have the conversation to say, you know, I respect that you have this, you know, and you love this, and I also don't like it at the same time, right? There's you know, so many different conversations we could have with just that topic. And when it comes down to it, especially when we're talking about, you know, let's just say let's just take the First Amendment for of the United States, or the freedom of speech, right? When you assume that there's speech out there that cannot be allowed, you disenfranchise the conversation on why it should be allowed, right? Of having the audacity to allow this speech is actually remarkably important, because then we can actually have a conversation about it to understand. Because if we can't have a conversation about to allow it to be understood, then
Mhm.
the longer it gets left alone, it gets picked up somewhere. It's criminality, right? Like when
Good
you
point.
when you it's the Adam and Eve story, right? When you tell
Mhm.
people they can't have the apple, they're going to go find the apple, right?
Mhm.
When you tell people they can't have drugs, there's going to be a war on drugs. When
Mhm.
you tell people they can't have guns, they're going to find guns, right? That's a reality that we have watched throughout history. People go find the things that they're told they can't have, and they're going to find it even if they can't have it, right? Like, but I can tell you, it looks a lot more like people are going to go find the things that they don't understand, because that's our nature in some regard. And I don't know how to explain that. I'm sure
Yeah,
there's
we
more.
chase the unknown because the
Right.
unknown's the mystery, and the mystery is where we find our curiosity. It's like, if I already know what I know, why would I just want to be around an echo chamber and create this performer where everything I hear is what I already know? Wouldn't it only make sense? And so we often, of course, the sad thing is, I just had a gentleman that had me on a show. He's a Muslim, and I would identify as a religionless Christian. So I am a Christian, but I don't adhere to the religion. I don't, I haven't made an idol out of the way that the church makes out of certain things. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I believe in the story of love and redemption and all these things. But anyway, so exactly right. So here's a little play. Tell me what you think of this. Um, I read a book a little while ago, and it talked about how for the Jewish people, Sabbath is an act of rejection. So the book title was Sabbath as Rejection, I think. I'm like, that's interesting, because to me, Sabbath is like unplugging. So it's like a 6-in-1 rhythm. Like, you unplug from your daily grind. I think it's Sabbath as rejection. I mean, I may get that wrong. You can ask me, if you want outside the conversation. But what's interesting is, to your point, if you tell someone that they're not supposed to do it, they'll do more of it.
More than likely.
Like,
Yeah.
right? Like the chastity ring, the reason that they actually brought the chastity ring is they were actually worried that there weren't going to be enough babies. So the chastity ring was like, don't have sex. And really what you're saying is it's a reminder to have sex. So the Western version of Christianity, like, if I think the Pope is now here in Canada because he feels horrible that a lot of Christians back in the day came over to colonize the indigenous people and towards a certain faith, and we stripped them of their faith, of their language, of their culture. We put people into boarding schools. They didn't see their parents for like 10, 15, 20 years. It's horrible.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is the Western Western society has a lot of old Puritan Christianity in it.
Yep.
And it's not like Eastern Christianity. Like, for example, Jesus was from the East, but now we have in the West. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not, going there to the point on dualism. But what's interesting is this: Western Christianity, just when I talk about that Christianity piece, they look at Sabbath as a day of restriction. Ask yourself, you tell someone to restrict a certain habit, they'll be like, I'm not supposed to, I want to do more of it now. Like, because we have this side that wants to go, what's beneath it? It's to your point earlier. Like, why is it so dangerous to uncover what's really in there? Like, if we don't let people express what's really in there, like, so we'd rather not know what's going on in there. We feel safer by not knowing what's going on. Wouldn't we want the opposite?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is it's almost like, instead of us being like, we should restrict what's going on in there, maybe it should be our societal act of rejection and the rebellion to keep things comfortable. Because here's what I happen to know. In my opinion, if you have selective preference, so if you have preference for certain things that just serve you, you will end up being a person who has selective gratitude. Selective presence leads to selective gratitude. And when you have selective gratitude, my friend, it only comes back to whether it serves your confirmation bias or not.
Yeah.
When I think about people talk about, oh, we should say God is great. Listen, I'm about saying, listen, it's not about saying God is great. If you don't want to say God is great, no big deal. But the human being, we have to reckon that God, or whatever you want to call it, source, whatever you want to say. But so I would say God. So whatever you say, you say. But so for me, it's not God is great, though I think God is kind of great. But if I have a hard day and I don't really know, and some people are like, well, I've had such bad experiences with that source, and I'd just be like, well, then all we have to do is we have to acknowledge that God is greater than I am. That there's a force, there's something greater than we are. So for the Jews, it was an act of rejection and rebellion to work on Sunday. And here's why. When they were in slavery, so when the Israelites were kept slave by the Egyptians, they had to work their ass off 7 days, building bricks, barely time for sleeping, not 18.5 hours, for sure not. It was work your tail off. When they were finally freed from their oppressors, they made a pact. They said, listen, we reject the act of working on a Sunday. We reject. That's our act of rebellion. So think about it. They don't really have a problem. The Jewish people on Sabbath, they don't really have a problem of like not working. They're like, no way, we made a pact. We don't need to constantly be producing something so that we can consume more. No way. We have to get beyond that and say that there's something greater than my need to always create so that I can produce. What comes to heart for me mostly there, it's fascinating because I think the first half of life, a lot of it, in my opinion, has to do with ego control. We're raised by a family. We go to military, and military isn't just ego control, it's also ego container. But let's say it like this. Somebody needs to tell us that we're not the greatest, that we're not the shit spot, we're not everything, basically. Like, dude, you're part of the team here, you get it? You're part of the team. So, like, a religious church organization can do that. You're basically being parented is what you are. And again, I'm not saying the military being parented, but for some people, I do know people who had a horrible childhood. When they go to the military, it is a version of parenting so that there's ego control, there's status hierarchy, and it says someone speaks out of line and you're like, shut the fuck up, get out of here, basically. It's like, whoa, it's like, well, you're not everything. So something is greater than you are. And what I think is fascinating is that if we move beyond just trying to select the preference that would best solve our human needs, and instead being like, well, I'm not going to decide which one is good and which one is bad, and maybe I want to do some difficult things that I have uncomfort in, because that's the mystery in exploring the dangerous side of, and what's going to come, like, I don't know, but it's not dangerous as an unhelpful, but it's just like bringing new safety to old dangerous. Then we become grateful consistently. And what happens then is this is the most fascinating thing that I've, at least for me, have experienced. And I'd like to hear what your view on this is, but your ego container grows. So ego container is very helpful. You want to be able to hold more. The unhelpful side of ego is saying like, I am everything, I am God, watch me, I got all the answers. That's unhelpful side of ego. And so the first half of life, there will come a time when you're going to be served notice that you don't have it all figured out, and you're going to hit threshold like I did, but you can come out of the tunnel one of two ways. I came out looking disheveled, and I finally moved over to include both ends. Some people still come out and they say, no, either or, big F you. And they're just angry tyrants. Think
Contempt.
about contempt. If you come out being in full of contempt like that, what you're able to hold, which is your ego container, gets really small. And if you can't hold more, society actually needs you to step into your influence at that stage of your life. We need older people to relate ancestral wisdom and connect and relate, bring the young people together, bring it all together to help not soothe us away from our anxiety, but to bring that this has actually happened before and we're going to be okay. Because if not, we're always just survival mechanism, right? So what's your thinking around that?
Well, I think you're absolutely, you're on something, right? And I hate to say you're right, because who knows, right? But I will say you're onto something, because that's very much how I've lived, right? And I've stepped into this way of thinking that one of my rules of life is you don't know what you don't know. Right. And so when you assume that, you're always surprised, or you're never surprised by being wrong, and you're okay with it. And I think, when you find yourself being wrong, how you respond is very important, because it determines who you are, right? When you're found to be wrong, do you gaslight people? Do you hold contempt for people? Do you hate those people? Do you defend yourself regardless? Do you hold your ground, right? Because all of those things are probably not good, right? I'm not going to say they're bad, but they're probably not good, right? Because a good way to be wrong, in my opinion, is help me understand more about this, right? If I'm wrong, help me understand why. Where did it come from? How did it come to be? And this is what I do a lot, right? I think I find people, or I shouldn't say I find people, people find me that are okay with being wrong, right? And their discussion shows it. But what has happened to those people, I think, often comes from just being so overly traumatized that they're forced to believe they're always wrong. But in some way, I think that actually prepares them for happiness. I think it prepares them for joy a lot
so
more.
Good.
Which is, it's hard to say, right? Because it's like saying you have to go through trauma to find happiness. And I don't like that. I don't think that's necessarily true. At least I don't know yet. I don't want it to be true, because I'd like people to not have to go through trauma to find happiness. But I think going through hard things prepares you so much to disregard contempt, to disregard hate. And it helps you learn to accept really hard realities in life. And it supports your willingness to accept those realities, and then learn to love everything around what's happened to you, and create this kind of version of yourself where you don't look at it as, this happened to me and I'm the victim of this for the rest of my life. It's, I'm a survivor of this, and I don't want to live as a victim, or as I feel like a victim has to live, and that's not to say being a victim is a bad thing. It's just, when you become a victim of something, oftentimes it's just like depression, and your conversation about depression with Tony Robbins. You do victim really well, right? You create that as an excuse, and you create that and craft that as a way of keeping yourself in place. I think more out of misunderstanding or lack of understanding is probably better. Not necessarily misunderstanding, lack of understanding, naivete, ignorance, all those things. None of those things I see as a bad thing. I don't see being a victim isn't a bad thing. I don't see ignorance as a bad thing. I don't see naivete as a bad thing. They are just, they're a lack of, right? And when you start digging into trauma, when you start digging into what you've been through, you start to realize that, man, I don't know what I don't know. And that's why I hold that rule, is because I went through this. I was remarkably ignorant when it came to suicide. I was remarkably ignorant and naive, and I held so much contempt and hate for my dad at some point.
Mm.
right? And then I also allowed that to bleed into myself. And so I was a victim of myself. I was a victim of my dad. I was a victim of the guy that beat me when I was a kid. I was a victim of the bullying that I went through. And throughout my life, I allowed it to control my interaction. I allowed it to control my ability to, you know, develop myself and my thinking to a point where, there was multiple points. It's not just one, where multiple points I finally found the capacity to push into that uncomfortable territory, have those conversations, and realize, man, I was naive. I was remarkably ignorant. I was thinking either or, and I wasn't thinking both and. I wasn't thinking about how all of these things were interconnected to craft this personality that isolated myself and kept myself away from the things that could actually develop me, the things that could actually, connect with me, because we're all looking for connection, right? We're all looking for this interconnected and interdependent web
Mm.
of people we call society, right? I can't make my own shoes. I can't even make this hat, right? So I
Mhm.
need other people to do that for me. I need other people to kind of help me build, make my food, right? Because I can't make a can of soup right now. Like, I don't know how to do any of that, right? Um, there are things that I know how to do that have become beneficial for society, right? And however society transforms, it's my job as a human being, not necessarily to lead society, but to create as much as I can.
Mm.
And when I say that, it's not about saying everyone needs to create. It's about creating as much as I can to support, either myself, my family, my friends, my culture, my country, whatever you want to, whatever, however you want to look at it. It is about human creation. We are here to create and develop a life that is beneficial, I think. I think living a noble life is an important thing, and how you define that nobility is also important, because we as a society are trying to have conversations around how do we define that nobility. And some would say, you know, it's okay to control people. It's okay to control women, or it's okay to control people of color. It's okay to control, what, even now it's okay to control cis white men, right? And all of those conversations are holding a specific contempt that disregards the opinions of those people, and they're not developing a real conversation around those. And though it may be hard to listen to people that have really fucked up ideas, right?
Mhm.
I am a white man, a straight white man that has grown up, excuse me,
Mhm.
uh, with a lot of straight white men who
Mhm.
believe they're entitled to something that they're really not,
Mhm.
especially with women, right?
Mhm.
And it's a really hard conversation to have with them. But if we don't have it, they're just going to maintain that capacity for, whether you call that violence or domestic violence or whatever you want to call that, control, manipulation, coercion, uh, any of that, unless we start having wide conversations and start pushing into those conversations and forcing each other to sit within those conversations, we're not making anything look noble to all people. And what we're going to build is a divide that is is built on contempt, a foundation of contempt on both sides, and that develops violence and that develops war.
I think that is so on point. When I think of nobility, we all want that. And when I say we all want, I think we enjoy ourselves best when we bring things of meaningful value, where we support life with more of life. Like the human being just doesn't enjoy not, even if you look at, I'm sure, a demonstrous figure like Hitler. Hitler thought he was somehow eradicating people of venom, or like, or, like, sorry, not venom, like, vermin or whatever, or like,
Yeah.
of a disease, right? And so when I think about, and this is often when I do work with my people, whoever they are, but the people that choose to work and find me, like you say, your people find you, my people, we have these people. Um, if listeners, try this. Go online and type in emotional wheel. Just type in emotional wheel and just print
Yep.
off a picture of emotional wheel and look at all those emotions and ask yourself, which of those emotions do you feel on a daily basis? And what's interesting is, to your point, when you say hate, I would agree with you. If hate stays stuck at hate, it's not beneficial. But if it's true that there's a time to love and hate, not or and, love and. So
Yeah.
it's like you feel these two things, not parsing out which is good or bad. And I love where you're going with this. It's to say, how would I hate things properly? Meaning, how would hate
Right.
be beneficial? And so, right. And so what I think about is, I have a little play. My wife often reminds me that, to be totally honest, all things that we feel in life. So think about a feeling. We have a feeling which lasts about, what do they say, 6 to 90 seconds. And from that feeling, we attach a thought. And from that thought, we now create an emotion. And from that emotion, create a state, which is a mood. And that's how this begins. And this is how it actually this is how they say it goes, right? Um, and so when we consider that, and we say, okay, so if I have hate, what is hate designed to bring? Without hyperbole, see it as it is, keep facts intact. That's, in my opinion, very important. Hate, anything that's stuck is going to feel pretty awful after a while. If I'm just like completely joyful and I can't relate with your depth of suffering, my friend, this is a little bit off. This is tone deaf. This is not helpful. And I'm
Yep.
not going to enjoy. Who cares what you do? I'm not going to enjoy myself because I'm violating the term of life, which is to bring more life. Okay, so when I think about what all emotions actually are, so if I feel hate, hate moves from what it is, not in an anxious way, the next thing. Any emotion is just designed to prime you to take proper action for the next thing you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this, to the point on reject, or we perhaps as society, we need to choose actions of rejection. So I hate the fact that society says that what I create isn't important. I hate that. Therefore, I'm going to create. Watch. But I'm not going to create this from a place of that I feel insecure that they don't all tell me that I know what I'm doing. I don't need to defend myself because I don't need to show that I have a feeling that I might be wrong. As a matter of fact, the only reason that I do what I do, to be honest, even for me, is I'm participating in something that has life. And you know what has life? Something where at the core of it is a problem that hasn't been solved and never will be. And we get to keep evolving it. So anything good has at the core of it a problem. So the fact that it's wrong, of course it's wrong. Tell me how so. What's your perspective? Because if we only gain our security from when things work out for us, well, now we're going to do what an older president has done. It's confirmation bias activation. It's like anything that worked out well, he said it was me. Anything that didn't work out well, he's shown the world. And it's, I don't want to pick on him. It's not just him. I'm just using him as a figure. I'm not pro or against him. I'm just saying. Okay. So we build our strength not just from our place of security, but insecurity at the exact same time.
Yep.
To your play on pain, if you want to check out a really cool song, look at Andy Grammer, I Wish You Pain song. We have this big linguistic poster in our living room, and it just talks about I wish you pain. And it really, if you listen to the words, it's beautiful. Now, to some it might sound insensitive, but the truth is that pain, and I created an acronym for pain. Pain to me is simply please, accept, inner nudgings. If you don't accept inner nudgings, meaning if you don't accept that light flashing on your dashboard saying check engine, you will have to go to a place of suffering, which is learned helplessness. So it's going to ratchet up. You're going to experience more. And in my opinion, though, if you do well when something happens in your life that's painful, and you just pop the hood and you investigate it, not by trying to think, is it right or wrong? And by the way, oh, I forgot to put in oil. Instead of letting that be the bad news, say, an act of rejection is for me to feel horrible and identify this, that I'm a horrible being. I'm instead going to say, I was creating something different. I just wasn't thinking about this. Wow, I was a human being. Like, I was a human being. I didn't have to hold the stars in place. Fuck, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if I think about pain, if we do pain well, then what happens is we're ushered into how we can benefit from pressure.
Yep.
Because pain leads us to pressure, in my opinion. Pressure leads us to deeper presence. We're pressed from both sides. Pressing from both sides makes us present to what is here. And presence leads us to deeper purpose, and purpose leads us to passion. We begin, and that's the rebirth. That's when we integrate it all. We bring together all this stuff. We bring together, it's like, you know what? We're all angry at certain things. There's nothing wrong with anger, but hate is typically something where it's a trap. I know what you're talking about. Hate is like an emotion that we form around. I'm in a hateful state. Oh my goodness, that's a problem. If something that you hate moves you to something beneficial, perhaps. But we got to make sure that we keep this thing, and we got to let all the emotions. So I want to let all the listeners think about this. Look at that emotional wheel that you printed or you got on your screen. And I challenge each one of you to say, which emotions here haven't I felt for a very long time? And then you're going to become aware you feel it, but you just have told yourself you don't want to feel it because the world says you shouldn't feel it. It's not beneficial. Then ask yourself, and what's holding that captive? What's holding me pushing this down? And I want to challenge each one of you that when you feel it, be safe with feeling. Go, oh, I'm feeling this now. Okay. And what is this priming me to take proper action for the next thing? Because those emotions are designed to give you life. Because just like if I look at your position, right? Like who you are as a person, like what you do and like your role and who you are, you help humanity in two ways by being a coach and, like you say, ending life that is evil. Who doesn't, when you go to an air show, like to see when a jet plane comes by, if it goes the same pace, it's freaking boring. But when the jet pilot takes the throttle and thrusts it and then goes less thrust, that's when the feels happen, my friend. The stretch, the feels. If you don't make all emotions safe, we're in trouble. And that's, I think, where I'm with you. Like hate typically isn't just an emotion. Anger is an emotion, but hate is a state. Hate is something we're like stuck in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, just looking at the emotion wheel, right? It's from the center, there's large pieces of the pie, right? There's joy, genius, anger, sad, fear, disgust. And then each one of those has their own separate, smaller piece of the pie, right? So like joy, you can feel connected, present, calm, intimate, safe, care, silly, acceptance. And then there's more, right? There's seen, grounded, grateful, tender, belonging, love, free, kindness. And then I think it goes into these words around the outside, like dignity and resilience, right? Well, let's look at the opposite. Let's look at anger, right? Anger is protective, skeptical, resentful, armored up, frustrated, mad, aggressive, tense, loyal, suspicious, envious, defensive, irritated, furious, violent, hateful, right? And then there's reactivity and rage. I think those are states, right? Each of those, it's what's so interesting about like the emotion wheel is some of these words you wouldn't even recognize as an emotion, right? So many people would look at this and be like, I didn't know that was actually an emotion, right? And
good point.
Until you actually look into, I think words are so powerful. They're so important that people don't even realize that it isn't that they are necessarily like bad human beings or, in a bad place. They just don't know the words of how to express what's happening to them. And so it's less about this inability to function as a human being and more about this inability to express what is actually happening within you. And so when most of my work is honestly, one of my biggest challenges is usually, what are your values? And people will say, right, like I think one of the most common values that we all struggle with for the most part is loyalty, because we don't know how to define it, right? Especially in, this Christian secular America, we are often taught this version of loyalty that is actually quite toxic to us. And so loyalty, we're like, yeah, one of my values is loyalty. And I'm like, what does loyalty mean to you? And then this story of, well, you're supposed to take care of your family. You're supposed to, always be there for people. You're always supposed to, do things for others whenever they need. And then I ask, like, what does self loyalty mean? Right. And then they're like, well, there's this hesitation. And when they look at that word and realize like self loyalty would actually mean something along the same lines, but to self, right? I would be loyal to myself. I would take care of myself. I would look at myself. Well, then they're like, well, that sounds really selfish. And I'm like, why does loyalty have to be selfless? Right. And and then we realize this duality of the word selfish versus selflessness, and realize that there's this attachment of good and bad to it, where selfish is remarkably bad and selflessness is remarkably good. And then they realize, and then we have this conversation about people pleasing, and we have this conversation about what is too much to give, right? Where is your line of trying to develop this ability to give to people, but also make sure that you have enough to give to people, right? And they realize that they've never been self-loyal, and they've given all their loyalty to people that have not given loyalty back to them, right?
Yeah.
And so then they're like, well, loyalty probably shouldn't be my value, right?
It's a constant anxious striving away from focusing on the very person you take around you wherever you go, and that's you.
Yeah.
How's that going to work? It's a shit show.
When I work with people, one of my priorities is not to always have conversations about other people, right? Because what does that
you don't
build?
have them in front of you anyway.
Right. It literally,
I get you. Yeah.
For the most part, it builds contempt, it builds hate, it builds frustration, anger, and all good things to process. But if when I'm working with values and we only talk about values in the filter of how we work with other people, we then get it's that, going back to what you said, selective preferences creates selective gratitude. We only then can see value based on what we give other people. And the reality is when you start looking at values, if you're developing and building values and principles and ethics and rules and whatever you're doing for your life right now, that's where you are. If you're only doing them in your interaction with other people, you're making a big mistake, because you interact with yourself 100 times more than you interact with anybody else. And so
there's always something going on in here.
If you don't take the time to put self in front of those values, to then apply them to yourself, you're making a huge mistake, right? If you want empathy to be one of your values, and you don't write self-empathy is one of my values, and then justify or look into how to define self-empathy, then you're going to be so empathetic to everybody else that eventually your glass is going to break. It's going to be poured out. It's going to be empty. You're going to be dry, and you're going to be hateful. You're going to be contemptful, because you're going to look at everybody else and be like, well, I have given my whole life to everyone else, but nobody's given to me. Right. When the reality is if you're not building relationships that are at least somewhat mutual, right? Where me and James, like, we have a relationship that's been quite mutual, right? I've been on his podcast. He's been on mine. We're giving to each other. We're trying to have conversations. We're giving each other time to talk. If it was opposite, if I was just talking the whole time, not giving James any kind of, place to speak, James wouldn't come back. I promise you that, right? He wouldn't come back, or I wouldn't come back if it was the opposite. But we craft this mutual interaction.
Hey, we should try that.
And we enjoy it, right? Like we enjoy it, right?
Right.
And so you have to look at, whenever you're building values, put self in front of them first, then craft the interaction outside of you, because self is more important, right? Because you're going to live with yourself 100% of your life. And those people that are not giving to you and not taking care of you, harming you, hurting you, doing all sorts of things to you that you've been loyal to for too long, what are they doing? How long are they going to be in your life? If you keep them in your life for a long time, enjoy that. That'll be fun, right? But you may realize that your actual bodily values that you have an intrinsic feeling towards are going to say, that person's bad news for me, right? Whether it's their fault or not, or if it's just their personality, you may have to look at other people and say, I'm sorry, man. Like, I've been going about this a long time, and you've never done anything for me here. And maybe you're wrong, right? That's the funny thing, is maybe you're wrong, and they actually say, like, well, I've done this, and I apologize for anything. You have this discussion, then you realize, wow, I've been ungrateful, or this person's been ungrateful, and
because it was my preference to see a different outcome. But exactly, right? I get it. Yep. It's like here I thought it was gonna be even, like an even play, you and I, but also you just talk all the time, or I just do. It's like, oh, that's not a preference. So what, are we gonna trap ourselves towards a hateful state by doing selective gratitude. And that's what's going to happen if you can't be grateful. And we're not talking about hyperbole bullshit here. We're not talking about like saying there are no weeds, are no weeds. It's like, yeah, I felt uncomfortable. So to the play on the emotional wheel, I challenge each listener, take that emotional wheel, just print up any one. It's not right or wrong. Just print one up and then ask yourself, which emotions haven't you felt for a while? Just keep it by your bedside or even in your office. And then ask yourself, which emotions do I honestly say that I want to bring safety to feel now? And I want you to realize something. When you do that, you're going to probably feel a bit of discomfort. You'd be like, yeah, but isn't that what I've worked so hard to do, not to feel this? I've shielded myself, back to the point, shielded myself from all of life. And if you shield yourself, you won't live a full life. And if you want to see a version of the life that you're living in the small version, I want you to now circle the emotions that you feel on a consistent basis, or the ones you want to feel. And you're going to realize you're probably going to circle happy, joyful. There's like 2 or 3 quadrants out of the 8 or 9. You're going to circle as a sliver. So you're missing 70% of life. And ask yourself, is that what you want? And if you want that, there is a way. If you want this toxic secular Christianity, like in the States that we have, there is a way of existing. And the only thing is, you're going to probably have to transcend by exclusion. You're going to have to exclude a bunch of people so that you can believe you're transcending. Yeah. But if you want to transcend by inclusion, now that requires you make room for all the emotions. Like I have a little thing that I stumbled into years ago, and I think this might be helpful for people who are, so listeners, if you're either in that period of life where you're just about to exit the first half of life, or maybe you're already in the locker room, or, you're in that, halftime show room and you're wanting to come out and it's kind of weird. And it's like, wow, your world seems shaken. All of what you once got strength from is different now. Like where you once got strength and acting from knowing, now you actually don't know. Therefore you feel like you want to act, but you're not sure. It feels it's a liminal space, feels off. So something that has really helped me, this might help you, and I think it really could, is I always remind myself, we must increase the signal to noise ratio. The signal is the self. The noise is happening out there.
Yeah.
My people, like with your people, what I work with people is we can either wait for society to tell us what values we should have so that we can get what we want, and that's just letting them imprint into us. And that takes no effort. It's just you turn the TV on and you got some. I'm not against TV, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah, the other way, right?
There's a difference between TV and media, right?
Right. Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. So the other way is for you to actually, so I honor that about you. There's evidence in your life that you help people strategically increase signal to noise ratios. They decide what their values are, what lights them up. Because once you know what lights you up, now all of a sudden it's like, yeah, that lights you up over there. Like the media or TV does this or that, whatever. And then society says I should do this or that. And you're like, oh, that's really cute, really special. Like I know I already know what I like. So thanks. I'm good. I got 2 little stories. When I think about love, love to me is, unless there's self-love, there is no love. Love, in my opinion, through my readings, whatever that is, I might be totally off on this. I'm willing to be wrong anywhere. But love happens when there's a give and receive at the exact same time. You don't give and wait for the receive. There isn't a receive and then wait for the give. So what I practice every day is spending time with myself, giving and receiving. Because when you give to yourself, you can't not receive it at the exact same time. Because it's in you, it's of you. It's like taking your heart and trying to shut the bottom valve. You're going to die. Your heart has an in and an out. So if you give it love, it's going to pump out love instantly. In a pump, it's there. You don't have to wait, like, watch, I'm going to be nice to you and see if he's going to respond nice to me. I entrained myself, and I've done this every day for the last over a decade. And listeners, I challenge you to do this. Make a time in the morning, a time of reflection, a time for self. Set your day in order. Stand guard at the door of your mind. Love yourself. Because when you love yourself, you will receive at the exact same time. And here's why it's important. Then when you go out into the world, if you're in real estate, if you're in investment, I don't care if you're a farmer, I don't care what it is, but then you're not giving in hopes that you're going to return. Because if you're giving in hopes you're going to return, my friend, you're not giving. You're just trying to control people to your finish line.
Yep.
You're a hypocrite. I'll tell you where I was a hypocrite last year. For the first time in many years, I planted a little garden. My dad raised us on a farm, like, I have a little vegetable garden here up front, and I planted many rows of things. I have just a small little patch, but I try as many rows as I can. I'm not like this massive industrial farmer. I'm a small little organic guy, right? Yep. Anyway, I had 2 rows that I planted of carrots, amongst other things. The one variety of carrots was these really pristine, exotic, oriental, almost like purple carrots. I'm like, this will be cool. So I want to grow tough things, see if I can make it, see if I can help it grow. So as you can hear, the make it grow, I'm working this through, right? Then the other carrots, I thought I'm just going to get the normal carrots because I want them to, like, it's going to be an abundant harvest. We're going to have the carrots galore. It's going to be amazing. You know which row of carrots grew, which one didn't?
Probably the purple ones.
The purple ones grew,
Yep.
and there weren't many, but they taste okay. But the one day I looked down and I realized that, or I noticed right from the beginning, that orange or that orange carrot row, nothing even germinated. I'm like, what? And I kind of wrestled with this concept. Finally, the day that I did harvest on the purple ones, you know what? I looked down at that row of orange carrots and I said to myself, that's useless. I planted those things and it was kind of like, how dare they? I watered them faithfully. They had more sun than the purple ones did. Those mother truckers, they didn't give me anything. And then I took a step back and I just started weeping. I'm like, oh, James, that's how you are, eh? When you give everything, you expect something in return. My friend, it's time to laser up. Don't do this. Don't be doing this. To give and receive at the exact same time, my friend. Don't be waiting for a reward. That isn't love at all. You might be waiting forever. And then guess what? If you're waiting to see if you can give yourself some self-love, give yourself apparently evidence or compliment, whatever you give yourself, because other people say you might be waiting forever. People are way too concerned with what they're doing in their own life. Choose not because you want to get back, but just choose because you're human and you feel good and you enjoy yourself when you give and you receive. But please don't stop receiving. If you have a must, and you're going to realize when you do this practice in the morning, and whatever, people, if they want to know more about this, you can talk to you probably, and they can talk to me probably, whatever, and they can grow in that space. But learn what it feels like to develop that muscle on the inside. Because the truth is, love isn't real unless it gives and receives at the exact same time. And honestly, when I planted those carrots, you know what I did? I gave, but I waited to see if I'd receive. And then I didn't receive, and then I couldn't love it. Oh my goodness, not nice, not helpful. I still feel like crying because it changed my life. Many things have changed my life, but that was one thing. Like, oh, that's what I reveal. And so there again, my behavior drew me not to the fact that I was some shameful, horrible being, but I got to see something uncomfortable. And I got to feel the fear of, do you know what you're really doing? I got to feel disappointed in myself. And it would prime me to be like, wow, yeah, I disappointed myself. That's what's in there. Oh, isn't that the good news? I think we want to see what's really in there. And I love your channels, my friend. You make available safe places where people get to expose and explore what's in there. Bring to the surface the reality instead of playing with fantasy and being like, we're all good, we're all good. You ever want to see insecurity done nasty, like awful nasty? It's trying to say, whenever you feel insecure, just try to like cover it up with like 15 smoke screens, like taking a camera lens and putting Vaseline on the surface. It doesn't help. Think about Enron, right? What happened to Enron? Yeah, the numbers, they're not as good as we are, apparently. We're Harvard grads. So let's change the numbers to make the numbers look as good as we feel. Oh my, that's activating your confirmation bias. You're in trouble. So anyway, to the point I think is, think about the carrots in your life. Where are you planting stuff and hoping it brings increase? That just reveals to you probably that you would be best suited to build a musculature for giving and receiving at the same time. Because here's what happens when you begin the day, and I'll end it with this. I don't need to be done the talk, by the way, but this final sorry, I've been a little long-winded here.
You're good.
But then when you go into your day, my friend, you got out of your system that you're just a fucking taker. And you can actually be a giver because you have given and received. You have that muscle on the inside and you feel it and you know what it feels like, and you know what it feels like to be in alignment with it and not in alignment with it. You know exactly what lights you up because you've been there.
I think a good pause there is necessary, because things like that require more thought, require more. I think that the pause is necessary because of the power of it. That feeling and that passion obviously comes through, and I put in your introduction passion for a reason. You know, even our conversation on yours, you can just see what it means to you to have these conversations. And I want to point out something along the lines of what you've already said about love. When you recognize self-love and utilize it, I think what happens is you actually open yourself up to having far more observation skills and awareness to what is actually happening around you, to the point of, and not to make this, you know, jokingly or lightly, but it will kind of seem like a joke, to the point where you can look at carrots and derive all of that from them, right? Like normally you wouldn't recognize that.
Yeah.
But from a place where you have an understanding of who you are, and this recognition of holding yourself accountable is love, right? Like self-love to me is very much, it requires accountability. It requires this ability to say to yourself, like, hey,
That's smart.
you don't want to be this way, right? So you need to take responsibility for the place where you are and change. And that's okay. It's also okay that you've got yourself here, but now here's the accountability that you require to move forward. And I wanted to bring that point up because we've been having this conversation about contempt, and I don't think we've ever really read off the definition of contempt, because I think it's quite important.
Yeah, let's do it.
In all this. So I'm going to read off two versions of contempt, right? A noun, the feeling that a person or thing is beneath consideration, worthless, or deserving scorn. When you have contempt for yourself, when you have contempt for others, it is within the definition that thing, that person, whether it's you or those people or that's, system, is beneath consideration, is worthless, or is deserving of scorn. And to live like that is remarkably
very unaware, beneath unconsideration.
Yeah.
Or beneath consideration would say that you're actually not wanting to see something through a carrot, perhaps, or a blade of grass, whatever, right?
Right. And the other thing is along the same lines, disregard for something that should be taken into account. It's simple, right? To hold contempt is to look at this thing as inferior, of being even, being even a thought, right? And if we can't make self-love a thought, right? If we can't make love a thought, your contempt will undoubtedly destroy relationships that could benefit you in the long run, right? But it's you're so right. I think in my own definition of love, right? And this isn't the definition of self-love, because I think they're a little different. I look at love as two one-way roads. I think love is all about giving, like the actual action of love. I think love is an action. It's an action without expectation, right? So in this conversation, I very much have love for you as a human being and as a man. A love as in what I would see as a brother, right? And I see that as, I give you the respect that you very much deserve. And do I expect the same? No, I have no expectation of what you give to me. I accept that my love may be unmet, and I'm okay with that, right? But love to me is about my ability to give. It is a charity of sorts. Yeah. That's my definition. I very much like your definition as well. So it's always interesting, right? And so when those two one-way roads meet, right? When yours meets me and mine meets yours, we have an opportunity to create something, a relationship, right? Not just an acquaintance, not just a Facebook friend or something like that. We have an opportunity to create a relationship that is meaningful, that is valuable. But to do that requires the development of boundaries, the development and the understanding of, if we are to do this together, this is where we have to stay within the boundaries of things, right? Of life, of our road together, right? And if we're talking about an intimate relationship like me and my wife, right? It's don't cheat, don't lie, don't be dishonest, don't hide things, don't, express yourself to me. Those boundaries are, they may feel like you could go about them, leaving them unsaid, but you can't, right? These conversations, I mean, are so remarkably important to have open and honest conversations with any, whether it's intimate partner or any person that you build a relationship with. Love is the extension of fully understanding the boundaries of that relationship.
That's good.
And so it's, love is boundaries, right? It is saying, James can't do everything that I need him to do. It's looking at, if I'm, about to commit suicide.
Proper appreciation of releasing you to the autonomous that you actually are. Like, I'm not going to control you to my outcome. That helps nothing.
Right. Well, it's also on my end. If I have love for you, it's also expecting you to not be able to fix me or save me or, take care of me to the full extent that I may think you can. Right. Because you're the only person that knows what you can and cannot do. I may have a belief that you don't see your full potential, but it's not my right to say, James, you need to save me. Right. I'm about to commit suicide and I need you to save me. Putting that on you I don't think is love. But at the same time,
if anything, it'll bring shame, right? I'm sure you've had an experience there, right?
Exactly. Right. And that's the hard thing about suicide, is that there's a selfishness and a selflessness all intermixed within that conversation, right? Because I've been there myself and I've had other people that have been there. And it's a remarkably difficult place for anyone to be on either side, right? But it's about, like, this is why I have these conversations. This is why I talk less about suicide specifically and more about everything that can be developed up into the point of suicide. If you can develop more connection.
That's so beautiful. You're utilizing something that is a relevant topic, because suicide's a relevant topic. It might be a heavier one, but it's a worthwhile one, and you're using it as a platform because it's a real thing. I love it. You're not converting it to something positive. You're just saying you're using it for the energy that it has within it. Like, there's life force. How many interesting conversations that we have shielded ourselves from in life have so much life force vested in it, and we just haven't been. We say we're looking for the gift, but we're always looking out there somewhere. And yet the gift is right from within us. Like we talk about, like you said, self values. And I kind of said the self-love thing. We kind of were going online here. I often think, and so this is just perhaps a little off topic, but this is what I contemplate. And when I think this is almost too much for me to bear, I ask myself, what would it be like if people didn't let us love them? To your point, if love is a giving for you, if people didn't let you love them, how would you feel, my friend?
I already did that. I did that for 20 years and it nearly ended my life.
Exactly.
Yeah. I've been there, and that's it. It goes back to your point of how important self-love is, right? Because self-love is that accountability to what you disregard, right? Or what you've disregarded for too long, and recognizing your own needs. I think people don't look at themselves and say, this is what I actually need. I think it only, for some people, it comes around, 10, 15, 20 years after the traumas happened or after their childhood. And then someone on social media like myself or you have said, it's okay to look at your own needs, because, humans, parents, friends, family, all taught them you can't look at your needs. That's selfish, right? Religion taught them you can't look at your own needs. That's selfish, right? And they crafted this definition of selfishness as being remarkably bad. And it's not. Like, it's important. It's necessary, because you are the only person that will be with yourself your entire life, right? Your mom and your dad will die. They will not be around. Your husband, your wife will not be around. They will die. They will be at work. They will be in the fucking bathroom if you work from home. I don't care. But they will not be with you. Your kids will not be with you your entire life. And so if you don't have the fortitude to look at yourself and say, this is what I need, you will eventually, either you consciously or unconsciously, will destroy yourself. There's a very large linkage now that is being more and more fleshed out, that stress, right? The stress of things like people pleasing is actually coming down to things like cancer and autoimmune disorders. There's a very good book, When the Body When the Body Keeps the Score. When the body says no, right? When the body, and here's a disclaimer, when the body says no is written for, not us, not for regular people just reading, right? It's designed for clinicians who are trying
that book. It's a good book. Yeah.
You're trying to understand how to actually talk to people, and diagnose people. These things, the stress is out there. There is no good and bad stress. Stress is not good. And if you don't have the fortitude to look at yourself and say, this is what I need, and if another person is involved and you can't tell them this is what I need, and you have to either adjust your behavior or I can't be around you, then what will happen is you will not hold yourself accountable, and you will destroy yourself. You will hold contempt for yourself. You will hold hate for yourself. And that is a remarkable amount of weight and stress to be put on your shoulders. And whether consciously by suicide or subconsciously through things like cancer and autoimmune disorders, you will die. And that is a remarkably difficult thing to come to terms with. But I promise you, I am not joking about that. That's real.
It's so fascinating, right? To your play on all this, it's real. People, they think that people pleasing is what would just finally let us into a certain place of peace where people will leave us alone. So to the point earlier about increase the signal to noise ratio, right? Like people pleasing, we know is people deceiving. That's what it is actually.
It's a good way to put it.
Right. And so when I think about who doesn't want peace, they say the human being desires peace over forgiveness all day long. The human being came from a place of peace and wants to restore it back to a place of peace. What's interesting, though, is people pleasing. When I think people pleasing, people deceiving, I think that's desiring to be peace out there. But where do you live? Out there or in here? You live in here.
Right.
And I think when you bring peace from within, to me, I just call it a electrifying peace from within. There's so much, there's electrical wires in the liquid of peace, and there's like tension, man. It's so good. Pressure, purpose, passion. Oh my goodness, so much.
That's such a profound, I mean, we could talk for days about this, but that's such a profound realization for people. I can't tell you how many people come to me and we start having a conversation just about their family, right? And who's around them and their circle. And I start asking them, questions about like, how do people treat you and how do you treat people? And the contrast, like when they first recognize the contrast of like, wow, I treat people really well. Right. Yeah. And these people treat me like dog shit. Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, so whose opinion then do you respect the most?
And guess which one they choose.
And it's like, then I bring like myself into it of like, do you respect my opinion comparatively to your family or your friends? And you're like, well, you're the first person that's actually listened to me. So I really respect your opinion. Mm-hmm. And then I ask them things like, what would your family think of my thoughts right now? And they're like, oh no. But then like they can't, then they start making the connections of like, wow, there's people out here that actually care enough to listen, have the empathy to listen. And then I'm surrounding myself with people that don't want to listen to me, maybe have given to me, but have always given with an expectation for her or him to give back. And they see this contrast and they're like, this is fucked up. Right. But then they start realizing like, it's been me. I've never been able to stand in front of them and say, I don't I'm not going to do this for you. I don't want to do this for you. You know, I don't think I have to do this for you. And then it's this, you know, it's this crescendo of building security within yourself and saying, wow, I don't have to do this for you, you know, and it's just a remarkable, it's just a remarkable place for people to find themselves. It's hard on families, but I'm sorry, but families need to start realizing, parents need to start realizing that their kids are going to choose different paths. They're not going to do exactly what you want them to do. And
Well, that's the good news, because they're evolving the thing.
Exactly, right? Like the world isn't, you know, 1965 when you grew up. It's 2022 and it's fucking weird, right? It got real weird whenever the internet got created. And it's a completely different place. And, you know, millennials, I think are kind of the first generation to really dig into this, I would almost say rebellion of sorts. I think it's a cultural rebellion. And now I think in the next 10 years, like you said,
well, that's the helpful side of anger, perhaps. It's a helpful rebellion. Go ahead. Yeah.
You talked about the fourth turning and you said 8 years. And I was like, fuck, man, I've been talking about, I think this last, like from 2010 to 2030, I call it the age of accountability. And I'm planning on writing.
You will love that book, by the way. You will love The Fourth Turning. Go ahead.
I'm definitely going to read it, but I'm writing my own book, kind of focusing on that of age of accountability and talking specifically about how social media, I think, has been the real catalyst behind it. Because never in the history of humanity have we seen the amount of conversation and discussion and information available to us at any one time. And social media has been the purveyor of that. Certainly you can look at the internet, but social media, there's a difference between social media and the internet, right? Though social media uses the internet, social media captures, I think, the minute details and the intrinsic kind of complexities of human interaction, whereas the internet is trying to focus on facts and opinions and stuff like that. It's not the intimate stuff. It's not the expressive.
Social media is a little more messy. Like you're getting a little more of the raw, even though some of the stuff is just put out there. But the truth is they're experiencing, exploring an emotion, whatever.
Exactly. And that's never been done before, but it's coming to a point where people are now paying attention. They pay attention to expression. And we always have. That's why stories and dramas and the Greek dramas existed, right? The Greek tragedies, Shakespeare. We love expression. We can't get enough of it, right? That's why TikTok has been created, because we can't get enough of it. And going further, more social medias will exist where expression is the focus. And it's very much transforming culture, because now I think you very much see this gap of, you know, Gen X, baby boomers, and then millennials and Gen Z and beyond. We're all looking at each other from different ends of the time scale and saying, your version is kind of fucked up, right? And then other people are looking at your version is pretty fucked up. Like you look at history and we're like, well, look at fucking internet, dude. You know, like, and we're having these conversations with contempt and with hate and all this stuff. And we really need to kind of put the pieces back in place to have conversations.
And you know what, after The Fourth Turning, I love that. So you're right. I'd love to read your book on it as once it comes out. Make sure I get the first copy. I don't want to be that selfish, but anyway.
I'll have you as a beta reader. How about that?
I love that. I would absolutely love it. That'd be super fun. So, oh my goodness, there's so much inside of that space. Honestly, what floods to my surface, it's just like right there. It's like, it's so fascinating what we do as humans. But you brought something up earlier. Like I think about my clients, right? When you see them realize that they can create the securities of life instead of looking for them. Because if you're looking for certainties, you're looking in all the wrong places.
Yeah.
You need to create the certainties in your life. And so what I think is fascinating is there is something. So, earlier I forgot to mention, but we all go through a few seasons of naivete. So the first season, then there's one, there's two, I think, perhaps there's three, I forget what it is. But my kids are still in the first season of that naivete, right? And so when I think about the way that things are, and and when I say the way things are, I have to be careful. I talk, from someone who lives in Canada, though I've traveled to different parts of the world, but I've lived in Malaysia for a while. So I've lived on the other side. So I see that just because I perceive the world a certain way here doesn't mean that they have the foggiest way of cognating what that is to live that over there. Like they live so different. All that I happen to know is we all create a big other. And the big other is because um, we ourselves went through trauma. They say we went through trauma, we go through trauma when we're born, right? And so there's where we recognize that we become a separate human. Like we're not just in our mother, we're there. We are our own person. Like you are that and I am this. You are there and I am here. Though we're together, but we're different. Like you have different things. And so the way that we kind of deal with this anxiety and this trauma is that we basically have need to find the big other in our life. And the big other typically is how we find need of God. Like I find need of God in a certain way. So my definition of God or of source or something looks like this. And how we see a force bigger than ourselves, because when we're babies, we begin to realize there's a big world out there and we're just here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's big others, something bigger than us. Okay. And so what ends up happening is choosing a big other. It's kind of by default when we're a child, we realize there is a big other. And we often see our parent as being the physical embodiment of how we would, if we've never had a conversation internally about God or had anybody talk to us about God or the source or universe or anything, we just kind of begin to see them as our big other. And what happens with the big other, and we typically have one or maybe two in our life, but we begin to narrate for them. And so I find it so fascinating. So to your play on the work you do with your people and the work I do with my people, when they finally realize that when I ask them a question, it's so precious. I say, so what do you think about this? Then I hear an answer and I say, it sounds like your mom talking. What do you think? Because I know them a little bit. They're like, how did you know? I'm like, well, I know we haven't talked about your mom for like about 2 years, but the only thing is this doesn't even sound like you. And they're like, that's true. What is this inside of me? And I'm like, listen, you're just narrating for your big other.
Yeah.
So once you can do something other than to narrate for what you think they want to hear, but you finally get the balls and the courage, the balls, if there's women listening, I don't want to say it like this, but if you finally get the courage to finally be like, you know what, why is what I'm going to say, why does it need to be approved from the other? And I just get to experience it for the first time myself by saying it and unfolding in public like that. That takes a certain level of courage, which I think is like that piece, it's been electrified. Holy smokes. You're like, I love. So I think that's the give and take, and you're enjoying. And oh, my friend, I'm going on some rails, but I just love your work, man. It's good.
I could say the same about yours because we do very similar work. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we could have a very, very long conversation about just about everything in life, but I have more meetings to go to after this, so I've got to call this, I got to call this episode where it is, and we might have to have another episode at some point. So I think we should do that. We should set that up, and we'll find some more time to have further and deeper conversations. I'd love to hear what other people have to say about this episode, and maybe we can kind of go off of that.
Love it. That would be helpful.
What would other people like to hear? So maybe we'll do that. But before we do that, before we go that way, you need to answer one question for me, just like everybody else has answered. So if there was one message, James, you could leave the world, what would that message be?
Engage with life now, or participate with life now. Just participate with it. No need to say, is it good or bad? Just check into where you're at and participate. The fact that it's right there in front of you, that's your gift. If you can find hidden in that gift, you will discover disguised in there are the very nuggets to help you on the exact step of your journey. Just engage where you're at right now. Just participate with it. I know that sounds overtly simplistic, but honestly, you will stumble into a few beautiful things. And I look at life like this. We're all stumbling humans. We all stumble into things. So why not you just stumble into what maybe is there?
I love it. I love it, James. And I profoundly thank you for giving me your time and also having me on your podcast episode. I might link it down below if people want to listen to that one, because both of these have been great experiences for, I imagine, both of us. I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think you would be here if you didn't enjoy that first experience. So
Absolutely.
I loved both of them, you know, and I know I'm going to love the next one that we have. If you ever have any thoughts, feel free to, for those of you out there listening, if you ever have any thoughts, feel free to leave a comment. Tell us what we should talk about next time, whenever that next time is. And, well, I just want to thank you for still listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Take care. Thanks, Dylan.
Absolutely.